Welcome to our webinar today entitled Business Resilience in the Era of COVID. My name is Colin Gelfer, one of the co-founders of Atrium, and I'll be one of your hosts today. Also joining me today from Atrium, we have Greg Barlin, Vice President of Analytics. For today's session, we're going to spend a few minutes discussing some of the emerging trends related to how companies are adapting to the disruption brought on by COVID-19. We'll then see some of these concepts in action. We'll look at how companies are taking quick approaches to dealing with customer acquisition during this challenging time, and then spend some additional time looking at how companies are leveraging analytics to reactivate for growth and retain their customers. And then we're going to close the loop a bit on our story here and show how we can help our friends in logistics ensure orders are shipped on time. And then lastly, we'll have a little bit of a discussion around where does Tableau and Einstein and Salesforce fit into the mix here. And then we'll wrap it up with how we move forward. I realize that for many of you, Atrium might not be a household name just yet. So before we jump into the meat of the content, just a little context on our organization. Atrium is a platinum Salesforce consulting partner that is focused on taking insights from Einstein, both descriptive analytics and machine learning generated insights, and pushing those into the workflow of an end user so that they can take action. And that action is often taken in cloud applications, things like Sales Cloud or Service Cloud or Marketing Cloud, and the broader Salesforce platform. So at Atrium, we really want to bring three elements together: business strategy, paired with data science skills, and the ability to implement cloud applications with a data-driven approach, Salesforce being chief among those applications. We're implementing Salesforce and Einstein at some of Salesforce's largest customers. I won't read through all the ones you see here, but the last thing I'll mention is that we're also a Tableau partner. So if you need help navigating conversations with regards to when do I use Tableau versus Tableau for CRM, how does Einstein fit in the mix? We can certainly help out on that front. Okay, so let's jump into the discussion here. So we have this funny little cartoon here, but it really encapsulates what a lot of companies are grappling with. In the cartoon, we can see a meeting going on, discussing some languishing plans around digital transformation, and we see the quickly approaching wrecking ball that is COVID-19. Obviously, when you and the companies you work for set your plans in motion for 2020, I'll venture a guess that none of you had built into your planning assumptions a global pandemic. If you did, well, certainly a tip of the hat to you. But if you're like most companies, the environment we're operating under was completely unexpected, or at least not expected for this year. And depending on the markets you operate in and the industries you serve, the impact has been wide-ranging. And maybe you're one of those companies that you thought had 2 to 3 years to nail your digital transformation. But I think what we're all realizing is that in some ways, we're now living at hyperspeed. We can't take 2 to 3 years to reinvent ourselves. The needs of the business are immediate. What can I sell today? Are my suppliers back up today? What's driving this surge in demand today? And the number of questions really only seems to grow. During this time at Atrium, we've actually been asking all of our clients and prospects, where do they sit on the pain spectrum? And it really is a wide range, all the way from, COVID's got nothing on me, to the other end of the spectrum where, we're on complete lockdown. And of course, many businesses are somewhere in between. And the stories, they certainly run the gamut. But as challenging as it's also been inspiring. And what's really inspiring is not the companies who are crushing it because they were in the right place at the right time. Again, tip of the hat to the guys at Zoom. But there's a big element of luck there. What's really inspiring is the companies who are maybe in that middle tier, the 6s, the 7s, and the 8s, that are quickly adapting to the new realities and figuring out how to pivot their businesses and attract customers that they maybe have never even thought of before, or creating new processes overnight around fulfillment and contactless engagement. But every company is being disrupted by this crisis, even companies that are crushing it due to surging demand. Everyone is at some level rethinking their processes and their go-to-market motions. So, how do we lead and move forward during this incredibly disruptive crisis? Well, a good place to start is understanding the different phases you'll likely encounter. First phase is all about reacting and responding. It's a lot of triage. Uh, for those on the call closer to my age, maybe you remember the TV show MASH. MASH was about a mobile Army surgical unit during the Korean War, and it starred Alan Alda. It was a great show. And their whole mentality as a team was to quickly triage their patients and try to save as many lives as possible, not by executing the perfect surgical techniques, but by moving fast and removing obstacles. If you've spent any time in the first phase here, it's probably felt a little like a MASH unit. But today, we're going to focus most of our discussions on phases 2 through 4, how we pivot to the new realities and reactivate for growth and really accelerate new opportunities in our businesses. Now, I don't want to minimize, phase 1. There's a lot of companies that are still in phase 1. I was actually reading an article the other day about the impact of COVID on health systems and specifically the disruption of revenue cycles. I think in the first 4 months of COVID, this article projected that hospitals lost over $200 billion in revenue as non-emergency procedures were delayed or canceled. Supply chains were disrupted, and the ripple impact or the ripple effects into the economy were certainly widespread. It was pretty staggering. So clearly, there's still a lot of pain out there. But today, we're going to focus more of our discussion on phases 2 through 4 and the pivot we are all making or all will hopefully make soon. And if you want more information on phase 1, Salesforce has a ton of useful information on their Leading Through Change site. They're doing a lot of great work with work.com and really helping companies stabilize and get back to business. So highly recommend checking out their Leading Through Change website. Now, we know that there's going to be a lot of change over the coming weeks, months, and years, but some of the new realities are starting to come into focus. The first is obvious. For many companies, we have to do more with less. For many businesses, budgets have been cut, spending has been frozen. In some cases, teams have been scaled back. Yet, as we discussed earlier, the demands on the business and the demands on IT, those are greater than ever. So we have to do more with less. That one probably seems pretty obvious. The second reality, the shift to remote work, starting to feel permanent for a lot of companies. Of course, offices aren't going away, but more and more companies are realizing that not only can you have a remote workforce, but you can thrive in that model. And that move to remote work will change how your teams sell and service their customers. Digital engagement clearly takes on even more emphasis in a remote model. And the third one, this notion that something like this has never happened before, really forcing companies to adapt and change. How do you create a playbook for something that has never happened before? Well, while this notion that something like this has never happened before is certainly true, we also know that innovation is born from crisis. And while there are no modern equivalents for today's economic disruption, we have seen in recent times major technology innovations that have blossomed out of times of crisis. I think this timeline here is pretty interesting. It's basically plotting all the major downturns over the past 30 years. And what we've seen happen during these downturns has been a significant acceleration in the adoption of emerging technologies. For example, desktop computers weren't necessarily invented in 1990 as a response to the recession, but they certainly became more pervasive in the workplace. In 2001, we saw the rapid acceleration of e-commerce and really the ubiquity of the internet. The cloud wasn't invented during the Great Recession, but it certainly exploded at this time. So which trends will start to accelerate post-COVID? Well, we've already mentioned a couple of these. The move to a remote workforce, that's pretty obvious, right? That's going to continue to accelerate. And certainly more emphasis on virtual engagement. But the one that's really interesting to me are the changes in business patterns. I was actually on with a customer a couple months back, and this notion of changing business patterns really started to crystallize for me. He said, Colin, pre-COVID data, in some ways, while still valuable, it's less relevant. What I really want to know is, since COVID has hit, where are we winning now? And are those patterns different? I'm pretty sure they are, he said. And you can certainly see this concept reflected in this slide here. He went on to say, we've still been closing business during COVID. And what I want to understand is, what are those new patterns? And how do we propagate those patterns across my sales team so we know where to focus our resources? So in this slide, it's a very simple example. Customer segment 1 has kind of fallen off, right? But customer segment 2 has seen an uptick. And oh, by the way, the time to close those deals with customer segment 2, they're actually quicker now. So how do I make sure that my entire team knows that motion and has that sales play top of mind? Well, that's a great question. So in our demo coming up shortly, we're actually going to show you a couple of examples how to take advantage of changes in business patterns. Okay, so as you go forward, I think it's important to recognize that depending on where you fall on the pain spectrum, and depending what industries and verticals that you support, your playbook is going to look pretty different, but it will have some common themes. The first theme that we see is this notion of prioritizing decision-making. There was actually a great Harvard Business Review article that speaks to companies who were able to push decision-making out to team members who were closest to the business actually recovered more quickly during a recession than companies who are more centralized in their decision-making processes. So this notion of decentralized versus command and control. Now, obviously, you're not going to be able to change your decision-making culture overnight, but this emphasis on pushing information out to folks who are closest to the business and can make better informed decisions is certainly a theme that we see. The other theme is this notion of bite size and grassroots. So as we talked about earlier, a lot of you are kind of triaging different challenges within the business, right? We don't have 2 to 3 years anymore to go do a digital transformation project. We have to respond immediately. And often that means taking a more surgical approach and really addressing, smaller, more bite-sized initiatives. The third piece here is around data supremacy. And so every playbook going forward, we're big believers that data is going to be central to those outcomes. Companies are really looking at their data now as the agility layer. How can we consume data more efficiently, push insights into the workflow more effectively, do that all in a more rapid fashion? And then the last piece here is really around this notion of automation. And so, now that we have to do more with less, we're going to rely even more heavily on automation going forward. And that's going to help mitigate some of the resource and capacity reductions that we've seen with our teams. Okay, so these are some of the major themes that we're seeing. What I want to show you now is, how do we put these themes and some of these concepts into practice? So in this demo that I'm going to share with you, you're going to see 3 things. 1, how do you recast your analytics for quick insights? How can we quickly isolate those changes in business patterns? 2, how do we prioritize resources with propensity to buy models? So now that we've seen those changes in business patterns, how do we expose that to a broader sales organization? And then the third piece I'll show you in this vignette is, what does that look like from a management perspective? What is their view into the forecast? Predictability becomes even more important as we go through volatile cycles. Predictability in a business actually drives, in many ways, the valuation of that business. So we'll share with you today some simple tools and techniques for how to provide a better management view. So this initial demo vignette is based around a med tech company. This company sells pumps, displays, OR equipment, all kinds of products that would be consumed by a hospital or an urgent care clinic. And for the sake of my demo, let's assume that I work in sales ops. And as a sales ops user, I want to explore my data and potentially find new patterns that have recently emerged. So what you're seeing here is I've logged into Salesforce and I want to look at basic order trending. Okay. And when I look at the mix of distribution here, nothing's really jumping out to me. It's kind of a standard pattern that I've seen in my business. But when I dig deeper and I click on infusion pumps, I can start to see that as COVID had set in, our business around infusion pumps has really taken off. And that makes sense since these pumps are often used in scenarios to scale testing services. So that's an interesting insight. But how do we propagate that across my sales team? Wouldn't it be great if I could look across all of our accounts and understand which accounts have a high propensity to purchase infusion pumps? And so, really quickly, if I was to drill into an account, I'm drilling into Abigail Butler Hospital, I can actually see for this account, what is their propensity to buy infusion pumps? And here you see they're 75% likely to buy those pumps. And I'm also giving the leading causes for why. The account type, it's a hospital, they're an existing customer, but I can also see what's dragging down my score. So in this example, I haven't conducted a business review with the customer. There's no action plan, right? And they don't carry any of our infusion products yet. But I'm also giving back to a potential rep how to improve this score and actually potentially close the sale. And so first thing I'm recommending is scheduling a business review. And then secondarily, creating an action plan. So you can see here quickly we've gone from isolating that, our infusion pumps business as COVID started to set in has taken off, but I want the rest of our sales team to know that this is a potential play that they can run based on changes to our business patterns. Okay, so that's our first little vignette here around identifying patterns and then propagating those across the sales team. If I was actually in management, there's a couple other techniques and tools I can use to get a little bit more predictable around our business and some of these changing patterns. So one of the things that we like to do with the Einstein capability, so here we're looking at a field forecast. And what's really interesting, so not only can I see what I've closed one today, what the team's quota is, and what the field is forecasting, but I can also use Einstein to give his take at what the forecast is. And you can see here, the field is projecting 209 million in revenue, but Einstein's saying it's 170 million. Okay, and so that's an interesting data point that allows us to now have a coaching moment with our field teams. So for example, I can see my RVPs here, Julie Chavez, right? She's saying her team's going to do 51 million, but Einstein's only saying 40 million. I can also see the top, positive contributors and the top negative contributors. So in many of her deals, right, we do have executive meetings. Some of the deals where lead sources have come in from partners, those are probably more likely to close. But there's a whole host of negative factors, right, that are impacting our ability to hit the number that we're calling. In many cases, we don't have those executive meetings scheduled. Some of these leads have come in from sources that typically, haven't been great for us in the past, right? And in some cases, we're not even capturing in our opportunities whether a competitor is involved or not. So right now, as a sales leader, I can have a conversation with Julie Chavez, a coaching moment around what we're seeing from her forecast versus what Einstein is seeing, and hopefully have an action plan on where we can close that gap. Okay, so that's our first demo. I'm going to go back into our presentation and talk about the next vignette we're going to explore. So the next demo is really focused on how to grow and retain your customers. In this example, we're going to transition into the persona of a service sales rep, basically somebody who is selling service contracts in support of products that have already been sold into a hospital. And really our first step is going to be to hey, can we find some low-hanging fruit? Can we find some white space in some of these accounts? The second piece we'll then touch on is, how do we pull forward revenue? Maybe how do we automate some of our renewals and understand customers that are likely to maybe pull forward a renewal, and then maybe even address accounts that are at risk. That's really step 3 here. Where do we have customer health scores that are trending poorly, and where can we take action to address those health scores? And our first step, as I mentioned, is really going to be to white space where we have existing opportunities. So here you see an embedded analytics chart. This is Tableau for CRM, or for those not used to the new branding, this is Einstein Analytics. And basically, from just 3 donut charts, I can drive both conversations around where do we have white space, to where do we have early renewal opportunities, and also where do we have accounts with potential risk due to lower account health scores. Okay, so the first step is going to be around white spacing. So what I'm going to want to do very simply here, and you can see my filters across the top, I want to look at accounts that don't have any service contracts in place today to cover products that we've already sold in. So I'm going to apply this filter, and you can see Einstein already constrains the list of accounts I'm looking at here, and one of them kind of jumps out to me, and that's Fuller Memorial. You can see we've got an account health score of 29. It's trending up though, but we're not covering any SKUs that we have in distribution with Fuller Memorial Hospital. And really what I can do here, all within the confines of this dashboard, is I can actually take action right from the dashboard. I can open up the record and explore Fuller Memorial in a little bit more detail. I can actually create a new opportunity directly from the dashboard. If this was a customer I wanted to pull forward a renewal, maybe I want to actually create a different type of opportunity, create a renewal opportunity. And then I've also got the ability to create a business review and create an action plan, all from within the dashboard here. So I'm actually going to look at creating a new opportunity for Fuller. But before I do that, I'm going to actually open up the record. And I can see a couple things come into focus here. The first is this likelihood to buy score. And again, this is likelihood to buy a service contract. I can also see some top line KPIs up above, what my overall health score is, what my uptime percentages has been. Clearly we're not going to have any ROI on our service contracts yet because we haven't sold any in. But in addition to this likelihood to buy or this propensity model, I can also tee up for our service reps a next best action. So what this allows us to do is for any accounts that are scoring at a certain level for a propensity to buy, instead of just giving the top predictors and how to improve this, I can actually just give them an action. And so the most important thing for one of my reps to do right now is to create an action plan. So if I hit create an action plan, I've accepted that recommendation, and now I'm going to go forward and fill out the details there. The great thing about next best action is we can actually see who's consumed those recommendations and who hasn't, and then have that discussion with our service reps about why they've chosen to adopt those and why they haven't. And that's going to help ultimately with the overall care and feeding of these models as well. And that's one of the ways we'll be able to retrain the models going forward. Okay, so I'm going to go back out to my original dashboard here, and I'm going to look for customers where we can potentially pull forward a renewal. So in this example, I'm going to select all contracts. Again, we're still in the same 3 donut chart here, and I'm going to select all customers that have an expiring contract in the next 3 months, and I'm going to hit apply. Okay, so in this example, you can see that we've narrowed down to 2, and one of them, Park Memorial Hospital, got a pretty poor health score, starting to increase a little bit. They've gotten a decent ROI on the contract. Let's see if we can pull forward this. So one thing I would do as a rep is create a renewal opportunity. So I can actually create the opportunity right from within the dashboard. And we'll do that right now. Park Memorial. And let's put a close date in December. And maybe we're qualifying this, and it's for 250K. All right, I can add next steps if I want. And if I save that, I've actually created the opportunity. You can see I've got it right here, my key deals, recent opportunities. If I was to drill in and take a look, right, I can look at their likelihood to renew. And right now, Einstein's saying there's an 18% chance that that's likely to happen. And it's giving me not only the top predictors, but how to improve this. But as a rep, maybe I just want, hey, what do I need to go do next? And that's what we see down here with the next best action. So in this case, the next actions that have been recommended have been, one, to request a quote, and also reach out to your colleagues in finance to really review and determine the best discount options. Okay, so another great example where, we can actually put a likelihood to close model on this renewal opportunity and then set up specific next best actions that relate to this renewal opportunity. Okay, now in the next example, I'm going to go back out to my dashboard. And here we want to identify all customers, maybe where they've got their ROI related to our service agreements is exceeding 100%. And for us, that usually signifies that we're covering or servicing more products beyond our stated service level agreement. So we might want to amend our contract. So I'm going to click on the filter here, and I'm going to look at where we have an ROI greater than 100. And what that does, again, is it drills down to a smaller list of accounts. And I can see here, Kennedy Health got an increasing health score. It's at 54. It's not great, but it's increasing. We're only covering 60% of our SKUs, and they're getting an ROI on our contract of north of 100% here. So this is a great candidate for actually creating what we would call an amendment opportunity. So I can manage multiple opportunity types right from in this dashboard. And in this case, I'll want to create an amendment opportunity. But maybe before I do, I want to drill in a little bit and look at the health score of that customer and really try to get to the root cause of the issue. So here I can actually look at what's comprising this overall health score. And you can see number of SKUs that have been covered, what our uptime ratio looks like, from a service perspective, how long it's actually taken to repair these products in some cases, how many tech surveys have we received, and what are those scores. So all these metrics we're basically aggregating together to derive the overall health score of this customer. And looks like I've probably got to build that amendment opportunity to cover more of the products that we've sold in there. And so that would be my next step with this particular customer, Kennedy Health Clinic. So hopefully you've seen a couple different examples around how we can support, pulling forward renewals, identifying, new opportunities from a white space perspective. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Greg, who's going to talk through how we close the loop on this story around service. In a lot of cases, customer satisfaction doesn't end with just sales and service, but it extends into the mid and back office. And we start talking about things like logistics and supply chain and being able to ship things on time. So Greg, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about our next story.
Thanks, Colin. And thank you for going through all of that information. I think you did a great job of walking through scenarios where we might use insights, analytics, predictions within the context of Salesforce to help those Salesforce users make decisions and focus the efforts of our salespeople. But what about the users that aren't in Salesforce? Either they're not in Salesforce regularly, or they don't even have a Salesforce license. People like back office users, HR, logistics, supply chain. How can we bring some of the power of these insights to them as well? Well, there's a way to do that. If you're a supply chain and logistics user, for example, you already have your top dashboards in Tableau that you're in every day, wouldn't necessarily make sense for us to have you go into Salesforce to get those insights. And so here at Atrium, we've created a mechanism to surface those Einstein predictions within Tableau that I'm going to showcase here in just a second. So keeping it at a high level, the way that it works, you can see on the screen. So you're able to take the data, bring it into Einstein, train the model. When we do that, then that data persists and lives within the Einstein analytics space. We then use some functionality that's in Tableau, the Tableau Web Data Connector, in conjunction with the custom service we developed earlier this year. Basically, it's a service that can run on AWS or Google. We have a Docker image for it, so we can deploy it to many different cloud platforms. The service allows us to surface the results of the Einstein predictions within the Tableau platform. Now, as some of you may be aware, this functionality is also on the Tableau roadmap for release this coming year. So we're happy to see all of us thinking along the same lines about the ways that we can combine the best features of Tableau and Einstein. So the main reason, again, to do this is to surface those insights wherever people are working. We want that information to live in the context of your everyday work process, whether you're primarily in Salesforce or whether you're primarily in Tableau. All right, so if I share my screen, this is a quick supply chain at a glance Tableau dashboard that we've put together. Something really that a supply chain manager could come in and see. And you'll see on here, we have some recent large orders that have come through for Costco River North. They can see their trending order volume by region. They can see where they need stock across different regions within the company. And then a product breakdown and be able to scroll through that and see, East and West are doing okay. You can see in red the couple of spots where orders exceeded quantity on hand, but Central is really struggling, over time. And so what we have here on the right-hand side is an Einstein predictions card. So a way for our supply chain manager to very quickly see for these orders, are we tracking on time? What's our estimated days to ship? And do we have any scenarios where that may change? So if I navigate between these two different orders, you can see the card changes depending on the situation of the order. So if I look at the first one, you can see our quantity is 900, stock needed is 0. We have enough to fulfill this. And you can see that reflected in the card on the right. Because the order exceeds stock is false, I have a reduction in the days that it will take to ship based on average. However, if I click on my next order, you can see I don't have any stock for this. I'm going to have to create a transfer order either from my East region, well, I don't have enough there, or from my West region where I do, in order to get this to our central warehouse and fulfill this particular order. You can see our Einstein card changes on the right as well. So where on our first order, our estimated days to ship was 13.66, and we've increased it up to 16.58, primarily because we don't have that quantity on hand. So just a quick, simple example of a way that we can bring those Einstein predictions directly within the Tableau and surface those insights into the system where someone like a supply chain manager might be working. I'll turn it back to Colin to wrap things up.
All right, thanks, Greg, for walking us through that. It's awesome to see how we can extend predictive capabilities with Einstein outside of some of the traditional CRM processes. Now I want to talk about, why Einstein and Salesforce, or why Tableau, CRM and Salesforce. And just to give the audience here a little bit more background, why we're such big believers in these capabilities called Einstein Discovery is it really allows us to look across, reams and reams of data to understand and isolate certain business patterns that we can help our customers exploit. So the great part about Einstein Discovery is Not only can you build these models in a very declarative fashion, really focused on clicks, not code here, but it also provides really a lot of transparency around how the models are performing, and their efficacy within your organization. And obviously, all this is really outcome focused. So, what are we trying to minimize in the business? What are we trying to maximize in the business, and take action on? The other great part about Tableau for CRM or Einstein Analytics is that it really supports AI across a broad user spectrum. So, your BI analysts and data explorers have the ability to go in and explore their data for insights. But you don't necessarily need a PhD, to be proficient in Einstein. In fact, we often see roles where folks who kind of straddle the business and IT, but really have a good understanding of the data, we call those business scientists, can leverage these capabilities to build their own models. And certainly data scientists and folks who are used to building models can take advantage of these capabilities as well. The other interesting thing about Einstein, when you think about the capabilities needed to support some of the use cases that we've seen, often it's really two stacks. And in a lot of cases, they've been separate stacks. There's been tools for just the visualizations, and then there's been tools with a whole separate set of capabilities to build the machine learning models. The great part about Einstein for Salesforce or Tableau for CRM is that it supports both of these stacks, both the visualization stack as well as the machine learning stack. And that's going to help in terms of time to value and being able to get value out to the business more quickly. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the path forward here. So for a lot of clients, in some ways, they're taking kind of their first steps with data science in this data science journey. In many cases, they come with a set of expectations around data science that it's going to have all the answers. And if we just throw data at algorithms, somehow insights are just going to appear. And in some cases, companies have struggled because of that, right? And so with our clients, what we're often trying to do is refocus on specific outcomes. What problems would be meaningful to solve? And does our data have signal in it to really drive those outcomes, to solve for those problems? So usually there's some type of reset here where we're refocusing on a specific problem, specific outcome, and then looking at the data for signal, evaluating things like data quality and the ability to drive towards these outcomes. And then the last piece that I'll mention here is this notion of the last mile. And we're big believers that in many ways, this is the most important piece here. So where am I going to land those insights? We call it the last mile, but it's really where folks are doing their day-to-day work. So how do we bring that intelligence into the daily workflow, give it context, and make it actionable? So this is kind of a typical path that we see a lot of our clients head down as they start to reset expectations on how they can leverage data science and analytics in their business. And one of the ways that we're doing that is through a series of workshops that we offer up. In some cases, we'll work with clients to really help them understand how they can adapt their business and be more resilient, in light of COVID. And so we call this a COVID business resiliency workshop. It's really about trying to understand the personas that are impacted, what questions would be most meaningful for these personas to answer about their business, helping to build, really consensus and prioritization around the objectives. And then ultimately the output can be either, some type of analysis around the data itself, or helping them define what those actions are going to be to address those outcomes. So usually coming out of this, there's some type of roadmap or prioritized list of use cases with the business value associated to it. And this gives you a feel for kind of the sample agenda here. Usually we're breaking it up into 2 days so that we don't have people on a Zoom call for more than 2 to 3 hours. We like to kind of spread it out a little bit, makes it easier for our clients to engage during this. But usually it's around 2 days. We go through this persona inventory, and we do a lot of ideation. And then in the second day, we're kind of synthesizing that information and trying to prioritize it as a team to really drive next steps and actions around how to be a more resilient business during COVID. And one of the outputs is usually this chart that you see here, where we're essentially plotting our use cases based on speed to realization versus business value. And obviously things that are up and to the right are the use cases that we want to tackle first. Those are ones we can get at quickly and that have a high return to the business. So in summary, just a couple quick points here. Hopefully you've seen how AI and analytics can help you reactivate for growth during this challenging time. Certainly each organization is going to have a playbook to go forward and really, drive that level of resilience and adaptation in the business. And if you need help plotting your steps forward and getting started with your own playbook, feel free to contact us at atrium.ai. Thank you for joining.